So we went to Birmingham and we formed the English Defence League. And that's where the name English Defence League come from. Now, when we went to Birmingham, we went as a group of 50 men from Luton. We got violently battered, okay? The news, and this is where my first awakening to the media come. So there's a picture. This boy wasn't with us. There's a young English boy at a bus stop with a green top on, and gangs of Muslims just come from everywhere, and they battered everyone. Yeah, and there's a picture in the national newspaper, and they're jumping on this boy's head, and underneath the picture it says, "A fascist is attacked by anti-fascists." And I remember looking at it. Going, "What?" I remember I had an awakening to everything because I went from working on a building site, yeah, to 6 months later leading the biggest protest movement Europe's seen. And when we went to Birmingham as a group of 50, we had English Defence League tops on, and it said Luton Division, the name of our town. And these images went everywhere of English men getting chased and beaten, yeah? So this was Birmingham, and our first banners said, "Victims of jihad in Nigeria, we stand with you." Because obviously I was down the rabbit hole. So I was seeing that on Christmas Day, five Christian churches were blown to pieces, didn't make the BBC news, yeah? I was following all these stories around the world of Christians facing persecution at the hands of jihad, no one caring, yeah? So we went to Birmingham, we thought, let's highlight a lot of issues here, yeah? Let's make this a point. And we had banners, we had placards, but we got violently, the police had to lock us in a building for 2 hours because they couldn't control the streets. Then they got buses and put us on the buses and to get us out of there, and all the windows were coming in, there was riots going on. So from this, we then went back to Luton, and then we saw a Christian church in Manchester that had been taken over by Muslims, which there's been another video go viral just weeks ago, similar situation. It was in the area of Longsight, and they were bulldozing over Christian graves and headstones. So I was watching it going, like, they can't do this. How come no one's talking about this in the town? Where's the local political voice? Where's the politicians? Now, the thing where people said, because we took to the streets. Now, we went from a group of 50 men in Birmingham being violently beaten to going on all the messaging boards of English football clubs, then turned up in Manchester. And I was like, when we got there was thousands of young Englishmen had come from everywhere. And from the start, because of the violence in Birmingham, the men had come with an attitude of, no, we're not backing down, okay? So that was sort of the start and the birth of the English Defence League, which every city we went to, there was a justified reason for going, yeah? But no one ever spoke about that. And then I realised very quickly that everything I'd seen in Luton, everything I'd talked about in Luton, was happening in every town and city. So then I started meeting families that their daughters were missing for weeks. And then I started hearing all these stories, and it's one thing to read about grooming, and that's why I made a 5-part series, the one you talked about that you watched, because you don't get to feel the pain. I'm sitting with a mother, a father, and a brother whose 13-year-old daughter has been missing for 5 days, and the police are doing nothing. Now, so I remember going on big chat shows in 2009. Jeremy Paxman was the most feared BBC presenter, and he had a show called Newsnight. And when I went on, everyone was all our opposition at the time, and I was terrified again. And it was the first time my family had been crying since the time I started my activism, because my mum was threatened with her job. There was violence, police raids, terrorist attack, terrorist plots. So my family were begging me to stop. And I went on this Jeremy Paxman show, and I said to him, like, I don't expect you to understand, but I expect you to listen, okay? Our daughters are being taken. They're being groomed, they're being raped, they're being prostituted in every town and city, yeah? And he said, you expect us to believe, and it hasn't aged well for him at all, because in the early days, we were condemned as fabricating stories and making this up. So you understand the level. I met a father from Blackpool. The gang took his daughter, okay? The father and the son would ring his phone, and he'd have to listen whilst they were raping his daughter. Yeah? These levels, so you understand, and in 2015, so we go across the country, and I've done a presentation called The Rape of Britain, as well as documentaries, and I go back to us marching through Telford, and now the arrest rates for these crimes, if you do a graph, it goes like this, there's none, yeah? The English Defence League forms in 2009. By 2010 and 2011, the arrests are going through the roof. Now, we didn't expect any credit for it, or any recognition for it, but the government were then faced with something they knew was going on.
Look, my sense was, and this is part of why you're here today, like I've been watching that since then. I don't know if it's since then, but it wasn't long after that. And it was my sense at the time, and this is something I think that Tammy has observed too, that your work was essentially what called attention to the fact of these grooming gangs.
So Andrew Norfolk is the Times newspaper who finally question these gangs. Now, what he says, we saw the emergence of the far right. He's given an interview. I had been made knowledgeable of these gangs for years, but everyone was too scared to touch it because all the men were Pakistani Muslim and all the girls were young English children. Yeah. So he'd known about it. So for me, Andrew Norfolk, yeah, okay, you ended up reporting it in the end, but you was a coward for years. Yeah.
Well, I also think, it's hard for people. What do they say? Carl Sagan said, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. I talked to Michael Schellenberger about the trans butchery of kids that's going on now, WPATH. And Schellenberger, who's a very brave journalist, told me that he had listened to my interview with either Abigail Schreier or Helen Joyce detailing this out probably 2 years ago now. And he said he couldn't believe it. It took Schellenberger 2 years to contemplate this because he couldn't believe of the magnitude of the crime. And I think it's not merely cowardice, although there's plenty of that. It's also the fact that, look, it's a lot easier to write you off than to admit that there are gangs of people who've been brought into the country who have set out malevolently and with intent to rape thousands of girls. So it's a hell of a lot easier to write you off as a far-right extremist than it is to even begin to contemplate what that might mean.
And that's what he said. He said, when I saw the emergence of the far right, by far right, he means concerned English fathers, yeah?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Concerned Englishmen who are saying, well, we've had enough of this. If you go back to our videos, we're marching through cities saying Muslim pedos off our streets, yeah? Before all this. Now,
typical far-right stance.
Yeah, 2015 is when the Rotherham report was released, okay? Now, this is when Andrew Norfolk started talking about it. Now, so Andrew Norfolk starts talking about it, then they do an investigation in the city of Rotherham, and the city of Rotherham has a 3.7% Muslim population, and they find that over 1,400 children have been raped, yeah? And they find that the police knew, social services knew, the government. Right. So I remember at the time of this, when it blew up, everything we'd said, everything we'd been screaming about, yeah? Now it's in a government report. Now
that was actually one of the things that really alerted me to just exactly how screwy things had become. So that was before I made the videos that made me viral in 2016. But one of the things I'd been following was that story. Okay. And it took me, the way you react when you come across a story like that is, it's something like, there's just no way this can possibly be true.
And it's far worse than you can ever.
Yeah, well,
it's far worse.